Hey guys, it's time to read chapter 15. Ethan tells his story. Here we go. The next morning at the appointed time, Mr. and Mrs. Quincy walked out to the touring car for the ride back to town. Clara had already taken her place in front. Mr. Quincy looked around. Where's the young boy, Gridley? Does he know it's time to leave? I don't know, sir. He wasn't in bed when I went to wake him this morning. Ethan must have looked ill, for Matron put her hand on his forehead. Are you coming down with something, Ethan? We'd better go upstairs and take your temperature. Once they were upstairs, Ethan sat on the side of his bed, and Matron watched him with concern. I think you better stay home today. I'll tell Mr. Lehman. She didn't finish her sentence, for suddenly, Ethan threw himself into her lap and burst into tears. Matron smoothed his hair and patted his back until sobs ended. Now, she said, suppose you tell me all about it. What is so bad that it's made you sick? You didn't have trouble at school, did you? Ethan gulped. I don't want to be sent away from here. Now, why would you worry about that? Nobody's going to send you away. Suddenly, it was impossible to keep it to himself any longer. Ethan told Matron the whole story, beginning with finding Riley's picture on the floor and seeing Hugh in the bedroom, and ending with all that had happened yesterday. Matron listened without interrupting and then hugged Ethan tightly. You should have told Mr. Lehman or me all of this at once, but I know you were afraid. You've had a lot to worry since you've been here. Come, we'll talk to Mr. Lehman now. I'll go with you. Ethan took the box from his cupboard, and Matron tucked it under her arm. She took Ethan's hand in hers, and together they walked down to the office. Mr. Lehman wasn't alone. Mr. Quincy was there, and the two men looked very serious. We had no idea he would leave before daybreak, Mr. Quincy was saying. He seemed like a nice young boy, Gridley thought. He had real possibilities. Matron knocked softly on the door, and Mr. Lehman stood. Come in, Matron. Is something wrong? Is Ethan sick? No, I don't think so, but he has something to tell you. And she placed the metal box on the desk in front of the two men. Why? Where did this come from? Ethan, you didn't. No, Mr. Lehman, Matron interrupted. He didn't take it. You better hear the whole story. Ethan was more frightened than he had ever been in his life, but he managed to tell the director and Mr. Quincy all he had told Matron earlier. When he had finished, Mr. Lehman asked, Did you see Hugh after he asked you to get the box? No, sir, Ethan replied. Bert and I went fishing, and Hugh was gone when we got back. On the morning you saw Hugh in the bedroom, did he take anything? I didn't see him take anything. He just opened and shut the cupboards. All right, Ethan, I'm glad you told us this and brought the money back. You may go on to school now. Matron will write a note to the teacher so you won't be marked tardy. Patterson Quincy waited until the door of George Lehman's office closed behind Matron and Ethan. Then he said, We don't have all the pieces of the puzzle yet. If Hugh didn't take the box, who did? And if he did take it, why was it found out by the barn? Had the boy been at the Briars long? He came as an infant, Mr. Lehman replied. He was brought in by a mission worker who had no idea who his parents were. We've never had any request for information about him until a few years ago. He was a happy, cheerful boy. He was disappointed when others were adopted and he wasn't, but there were always boys his age to play with, and Hugh seemed to accept the situation. What happened then? Patterson inquired. When he was about 12, his special friend Paul was adopted by a couple who lived several hundred miles from here. Hugh began to change after that. He wasn't openly defiant, but he started to tease the younger children, and I'm sorry to say, bullied them into doing what he wanted them to do. I don't believe he ever actually stole anything, but he would hide things and suggest that someone else might have taken them. The older fellows, like Riley and Philip, were onto his tricks, but the younger boys were afraid of him. Mr. Lehman leaned back in his chair and sighed. I talked with him many times about his behavior, and he always promised to do better, but this is the first time he's ever run away. This will be his last year of school, and he was a bright boy. He could have apprenticed in almost any trade he chose if he didn't want to continue his studies. Patterson listened quietly to the story. I think we should find the boy. I'd like to see him make something of himself. Sound in the hallway caused both men to look toward the door. There was his knapsack in his hand, and looking very tired, stood Hugh. And that's the end of chapter 15.